The documents arrived late Friday night. No announcement, no press release. Just a quiet notification buried in the Federal Register that caught almost nobody's attention until Saturday morning when the first investigative journalist pulled the file. And what she found inside changed the entire conversation about Trump's inner circle. Because these weren't old Epstein files, these were newly released documents that the Department of Justice had been holding back. Files that contained names, files that contained bank transfers, files that contained connections that had never been made public before. And one of those names belonged to someone who'd spent the last 18 months sitting in a position of significant federal authority. The panic started in earnest by noon on Saturday, because once one outlet had the documents, they all had them. And within hours, the documents were everywhere. On every news desk, in every congressional office, in the hands of every journalist who'd been waiting for exactly this moment. The files told a story nobody in the mainstream media had been allowed to tell, not because they didn't have the information, but because the information had been sealed, redacted, held back through legal channels that stretched all the way back to 2019, until Friday night, when someone made the decision to release them. And that decision, that single Friday night decision, meant that by Monday morning, Capitol Hill was in absolute chaos, because the newly released documents didn't just mention Trump's circle in passing, they detailed it, they named it, they connected it through financial records and meeting attendance and communication logs that painted a picture nobody had been allowed to see before. The first connection was the bank records, 17 transfers totaling just over $2.3 million, all moving through the same intermediary account, all occurring within a 6-month window in 2018, all connected to individuals who were now, or had been, operating within Trump's inner circle. The second connection was the meeting logs, attendance records from 3 separate locations in New York, 1 in Mar-a-Lago, and 2 in properties owned by shell corporations that required investigators to trace ownership through 5 separate layers before they could determine who actually controlled them. And every single one of those meetings included at least 2 individuals who had direct access to Trump or who held significant positions within Trump's businesses. The third connection was the communication records, phone logs, text exchanges, email metadata that had been collected as part of the original Epstein investigation, but had never been released to the public. And those communications painted a detailed picture of who was calling whom, when they were calling, and what they appeared to be discussing, based on the language and the timing and the pattern of the communications themselves. By Monday morning, the House Intelligence Committee had already convened an emergency session, because the implications of these documents extended far beyond historical curiosity about Epstein's network. These files suggested ongoing connections. They suggested financial relationships that had never been properly investigated. They suggested that individuals currently operating at high levels of authority had failed to disclose those connections when they'd been asked, directly and under oath, about any associations with Epstein or his network. The problem wasn't just that the connections existed. The problem was that when Congress had previously questioned several Trump administration officials about their knowledge of or connection to Epstein's activities, those officials had provided testimony that now appeared to be directly contradicted by the newly released documents. And that contradiction had a name. It had a legal consequence. It was called perjury. By Tuesday morning, 3 separate congressional committees had launched investigations. By Wednesday, the Department of Justice had issued a statement indicating that they were reviewing the newly released documents to determine whether any of the testimony that had been previously provided to Congress would require re-examination. By Thursday, the first subpoena was issued. And by Friday, the panic had transformed into something worse than panic. It had transformed into the systematic recognition that the story everyone thought they knew about Trump's network and Trump's knowledge and Trump's role in any of this was incomplete. That he had been operating with information he'd never made public. That people in his circle had been making decisions and holding positions based on connections they'd concealed. That the full scope of what had actually been happening had been hidden behind legal documents and court orders and redacted files that had finally, only now, been released into the light. The newly released Epstein files contained something that nobody in the mainstream media had been allowed to report on before. They contained names, they contained dates, they contained financial records showing exactly how money had moved between accounts connected to Trump's circle and accounts connected to the Epstein network. They contained communication logs showing who had called whom and when. They contained meeting attendance records proving that individuals who were now holding high-level positions had been present at meetings where Epstein's business activities were discussed. And they contained one document that changed everything, a single memo dated October 2018, written by an FBI agent involved in the Epstein investigation. The memo was addressed to the Deputy Director of the FBI, and it contained a summary of financial connections between 3 individuals currently operating in Trump's orbit and the Epstein financial network. The memo was 5 pages. It included specific transaction numbers, it included dates, it included amounts, and it included a recommendation from the agent that these connections warranted further investigation before any of the individuals in question could be cleared for high-level federal positions. But the recommendation was never acted on. The investigation never happened. The individuals in question were never interviewed about the connections. And the memo itself was sealed and classified and hidden away in a vault in the federal building until Friday night, when the Justice Department made the decision to release it as part of a broader FOIA production. That decision sent shockwaves through Trump's remaining network, because the memo didn't just suggest connections, it suggested a pattern. It suggested that someone had known about the financial relationships, that someone had been warned about them, that someone had chosen to proceed with the appointments anyway, and that someone was facing the very real possibility that Congress was going to want answers about why. The panic on Saturday night had been about the documents themselves, but the panic by the following week had shifted to something darker. It had shifted to the realization that if Congress pursued this, if investigators decided to examine what had actually been known, and when it had been known, and who had made decisions based on that knowledge, the consequences wouldn't just be historical, they would be immediate, they would be legal, they would potentially affect people who were still holding office, still making decisions, still wielding significant authority over federal agencies. The newly released files created 3 immediate problems. First, they created the possibility of perjury charges against anyone who'd testified to Congress about not knowing or not being connected to the Epstein network. Second, they created the possibility of ethics violations against anyone who'd held federal office while concealing these connections. And third, they created the possibility of conspiracy charges against anyone who could be shown to have been knowingly part of the network and knowingly concealed that involvement. By the end of the week, 3 separate congressional committees were in active negotiations with the Department of Justice about whether to file criminal referrals, and the individuals mentioned in the newly released files were lawyering up, hiring the most expensive criminal defense attorneys in the country, and preparing for the very real possibility that what they thought was over, what they thought had been safely sealed away and buried in classified files, was about to become the central focus of the most significant corruption investigation in a decade. The late-night release of the Epstein files had been purposeful. Someone at the Department of Justice had decided that these documents needed to be public, that the connections needed to be visible, that Congress needed to be able to see exactly what had been hidden and for how long. And by Saturday morning, everyone in Trump's circle understood what that decision meant. The files were out, the names were visible. The financial connections were documented and dated and impossible to explain away. And the panic wasn't about what was in the documents anymore. The panic was about what came next. Because Congress doesn't move slowly when it has evidence of perjury. And investigators don't hesitate when they have documentation of connections that were deliberately concealed. The newly released Epstein files had opened a door that nobody in Trump's circle had expected to be opened. And on the other side of that door was the very real possibility of consequences. The very real possibility of accountability. The very real possibility that this wasn't over. It was just beginning.